Further debate, I recognize a member from Windsor West.
Thank you, Speaker. I'll try to keep the morning theatre to a minimum. So this morning I was prepared to actually speak to Bill 174, the Cannabis Smoke-Free Ontario Road Safety Act. Many of my constituents in Windsor West who have come forward and expressed concerns about the bill. Concerns because there are some provisions in this bill that aren't clear to the people in this province. And they want the government to explain exactly what it is, what they mean in these provisions. And, Speaker, instead of being able to actually debate the bill, here I stand debating the fact that the government doesn't want to talk about the bill. They want to shut down the debate and not talk about the bill. And now we have a member of the Liberal side saying it needs to go to committee. Well, we all know how that works. We all know how that works. The Liberals use their majority in committee to do whatever they want. They don't really listen to the people who come into committee to share their concerns. They have their set of talking points and their set of questions that they go back to. They use leading questions when they're talking to the presenters in order to get the response that they want. And I can tell you, Speaker, that I have one constituent in particular that I could tell you would love for all of us to have the opportunity to continue debate on this bill, to have a fulsome discussion on this bill before it gets to committee. Because by the time it gets to committee, well, frankly, Speaker, the fact that the government wants to shut down debate already shows that they've already made up their mind and they're not interested in listening to the people of this province. It already shows that. But I know that my constituent, John Lidke, would love to have an opportunity to have some of his questions and concerns around this bill answered. And he is not the only one. I know that he is once again going to be incredibly disappointed in this Liberal government, because this is not the first time that this government has used the tactic of shutting down debate and then claiming that in committee they are actually listening to the people of this province. Now, another thing they like to do is say, well, it should go to committee. We're trying to move it through quickly. We want it to go to committee to hear the voices of the people in this province. And yet, more often than not, committee time is limited. The amount of time you have to actually put forth your name to be heard at committee is limited. And they only hear people here in Toronto. Now, maybe they're not familiar with Windsor. They should be. They had cabinet ministers for decades in Windsor. They should be well aware of where Windsor is located. But apparently they're not. Now, Speaker, I know that you realize what a task it is to get from our area of the province to Toronto. How cumbersome that can be for some people. Some people think it's only a 4-hour drive. A 4-hour drive, a long drive at that. Some days it can take 6 or 7 hours to travel. Speaker, I'm sure you're well aware that down our way, actually in your area, there was yet again an accident on the 401 that shut down that highway, that very dangerous stretch of highway, Carnage Alley as it's referred to, because they don't have the barriers that they should have had years ago to protect the people from Chatham, Kent, Essex, and Windsor. But people are tasked with getting on the road, especially this time of year, when weather can be unpredictable. Thank you. When it can be unpredictable, and that can be a very dangerous drive to get here, or they have the cost of airfare, or they take the long train ride to get here. It's unfair that the government wants to shut down debate in this House, in the chamber, say they want to move this into committee really fast so they can hear from the people of the province, and yet often they don't travel the bills. They don't take them down our way. They don't take them down to Windsor to hear from people. They don't take it down to Chatham to hear from the people down that way. They don't travel up north to hear from the people up that way. They put it on the people of the province to come here and then say that they're open to hearing from people. So, Speaker, I think it's frankly shameful that we stand here yet again with the Liberal government trying to shut down debate on some incredibly important legislation that many people have some very serious questions and concerns over. So one of the things I want to talk about that constituent, John Litke of mine, had brought forward was a piece in the bill that talks about dispensaries, cannabis dispensaries, and the transportation of cannabis. Now, he is a medical marijuana user. He has a license, he has a prescription for some health concerns to be able to consume cannabis. And an interesting piece that he brought to my attention is there is a piece in the bill that is not entirely clear. It talks about how you cannot transport a prescribed substance. It doesn't say cannabis. It doesn't say prescribed cannabis. It doesn't say medical marijuana. It just says prescribed substances. You cannot transport those in your vehicle. So his concern is not just that he won't be able to go to a dispensary, a legal dispensary, and pick up his medication, but does that mean that you and I can't go to our pharmacy and pick up the prescriptions that our doctor has prescribed for us? This is a question he has. And yet we're not going to get it answered here because the government wants to shut down debate. I'm not going to have an opportunity to bring forward all of his concerns. And when it goes to committee, if they limit committee, if they limit the amount of time people can actually put their name forward, because we've seen it many times before where it's a very truncated process, there's very little time by the time the government makes the decision of when people can actually put their names forward. That can happen in days, sometimes not even days, sometimes hours. It gets out to the public and they only have a very limited time to actually put their name forward. So that information isn't really out there broadly, and by the time people see that they can present, the window of opportunity is already closed. So people like John and others who have concerns about this bill won't have an opportunity to come to committee and actually ask their government the questions that they have. The other questions that have come out of my riding, out of Windsor West and the broader Windsor area, are around the announcement that we will have a dispensary. Now, Speaker, the elected representatives in Windsor, the city councillors, the mayors, and the council members in surrounding municipalities, they weren't really talked to about this. They weren't really consulted about this. They didn't know we were going to have a dispensary. They don't know what it's going to look like, where it's going to be. How many dispensaries are we going to have? What is the delivery of that service going to really look like? People in my riding want to know. When we're talking about cannabis dispensaries, what is taxation going to look like on this cannabis that's being dispensed through these dispensaries? They want to know who is, how you get chosen to work. What's the screening process to work in one of these dispensaries? And again, they want to know how many are we going to have and where are they going to be located? And without proper consultation with the elected representatives in a municipality, it really is a slap in the face to those that were elected to represent that particular municipality. It's a slap in the face of the democratically elected city councillors, mayors, MPPs, and MPs to not have those discussions, to not give them a heads up. Hey, we are looking at your city as possibly having a dispensary. It's a slap in the face to not have a conversation with those municipalities and say, where exactly do you think the best place would be for this dispensary or multiple dispensaries in your community? What do you think it should look like as we roll these particular dispensaries out? So once again, the government has made sweeping decisions without consultation And now we find ourselves in a position where they've said their piece, but they don't want to consult with those of us that have been elected to bring the voice of our constituents to this House. This is something we're seeing far too often. It's not democratic to say that I've had my piece, said my piece, and now I'm going to shut down debate because I don't want to hear from you. They may as well put their fingers in their ears and go, na, 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 I'm not listening, because that's exactly what has happened. We see it far too often. We just went through it yet again with back-to-work legislation. The government drops the ball. They don't do their part when it comes to having a conversation, those tough conversations, and consulting and finding out how to make things better. They just come in and say, we are all knowing, we are all seeing. We should call the Liberal government the Wizard of Oz, because they hide behind a curtain, pretend to be something that they're not. They pretend to be all-knowing and all-seeing. They know better than anybody else. And the sad thing is, Speaker, it's not just my constituents that have questions and concerns. It's not just my colleagues here in the NDP caucus whose constituents have questions and concerns. It's not just the Conservative caucus who have constituents that have questions and concerns. It's the constituents of the Liberal government, the Liberal caucus. But what they're saying to their constituents is, your opinion doesn't matter. Your concerns don't matter. They only matter come election time when we want your vote, but once we're here, we don't want to hear from you because we know better. And that is wrong. So, Speaker, here I stand talking about the fact that yet again the government wants to shut down debate on a very important piece of legislation. And once again, they've rolled something into that legislation that they think, yeah, no pun intended, that they think they can go out to the public and say, we've done something good, and that's the issue of the cameras on school buses. We've done something good, so just look at that. Don't look at the fact that we don't want to talk about the other pieces. Don't look at the fact that we're shutting down debate and we don't want to hear from you. We've done good, and that will be the spin. That will be the spin coming from this government. We did something good, and the other parties, well, they had questions and concerns about that. And shame on them for questioning us. They like to do that, Speaker.
We like to read bills.
They like to point fingers over at this side of the House and say, shame on you for having questions and concerns. Well, shame on them for trying to shut down the voices of our constituents by bringing forward time allocation motions like they have today and shutting down debate. Thank you, Speaker.